Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Katan, quite a few stories for us to talk about this evening. Pope Francis making a few statements and having some meetings with some of the Ukraine parishioners. Also, we're going to talk about a very big announcement from Secretary General of NATO, Hans Stoltenberg, announcing that they will be getting involved, sending some tanks to Ukraine. Very big announcement there. But first, we're going to talk about the high inflation and some of the food prices that everybody's still experiencing.
That's right.
While inflation, seems to be coming down a bit, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, it is at 6.5%, which is a considerable drop since June when it was at 9.1%. Now, the game changer has been a drop in gas prices. But some grocery staples are not cheaper. In fact, they are getting downright ridiculous in cost.
One of the most concerning items on the list is eggs. In January of 2022, a dozen eggs cost $1.93, but by December, the price had more than doubled to $4.25. Now, over $6, up to $8 or $9. Even some grocery stores are hurting with these prices. Well, Dale Dozier Jr., a manager of Tozier's Family Markets, told CBS Weekend News, quote, "We're actually losing money on every dozen eggs we sell right now. If we go any higher in price, we will price ourselves out of the competition completely."
From roughly $2 to $9. What a hike.
Amazing.
Well, so what is the reason for these soaring prices in such a basic commodity? Well, experts say the bird flu outbreak is to blame, as over tens of millions of birds have died or have been culled because of the outbreak. Now, another contributing factor was high demand for eggs around the holidays. Now, right now, the only thing that can get prices to come down is to let the bird supply build back up, which is going to take a few months at least. But for now, everyone, including bakeries, have to be careful with every egg to protect their profits.
Wow. Well, eggs are not the only concern. Meat, poultry, and fish prices all rose 4.5% in the last year, while butter is up 31%, all due to higher production costs and inflation.
Well, the Food and Drug Administration is proposing to cut the lead levels in baby food by 25%, which means 25 parts per billion or less. Now, the proposal applies to fruits, vegetables, and dry cereal. However, it will not change puff cereal and teething biscuits. Now, the levels in these two items have been found to be the highest of all baby food. The author of Healthy Babies' Bright Futures, a report on baby food done in 2019, showed dangerous lead levels in 94% of all manufactured baby foods. Today, they say the FDA's proposal doesn't go far enough to protect children.
Wow, it's amazing how lenient we are with the things that bring in money and disregard the health of our youngest of citizens.
Why do you think that? Why do they allow any lead in there at all?
Yeah, exactly. Well, fishing is another staple for many areas of the country, but there is a lot of concern about how healthy eating fish from freshwater lakes is today. Research published in the Environmental Research Journal recently stated eating just one freshwater fish can contain enough of a chemical known as PFAS, we've talked about that in previous reports, to be equivalent to drinking 1 month's worth of water containing toxic chemicals just from eating one fish.
Well, Jeff Mueller, who likes to go ice fishing this time of year to catch freshwater fish, which he cleans and eats, has been doing so since the 1960s. Now, when asked how concerned he is about consuming the dangerous chemicals, Mr. Mueller told local journalists, quote, "I haven't been that concerned. I keep track of what the experts say that you should consume," unquote.
The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency says PFAS are, quote, really ubiquitous in commerce because they're really useful. They make things waterproof, they make things oil-proof, and so they're just really present. But because they're so abundant, of course, Jeff, they are definitely something to be concerned about when it comes to affecting people's health because, like the researcher said, you know, they're in everything and they're negatively impacting people's the food supply. Remember the farmer we talked about who was not able to sell his milk because of the high amount of PFAS that were found in it.
Right, they call it the forever chemical. Well, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been covering a little bit more on the PFAS that has been found in fish, but also has another story regarding blood donations and who they're going to accept it from now. So Larry, what do you have for us?
The Environmental Protection Agency has released a new report detailing the increasing state of toxicity in rivers across the country. The new data specifically addresses what are known as forever chemicals, or PFAS for short, which have been found in alarming amounts in all fish collected and tested. The chemicals have been linked to cancer and several different kinds of organ impairment. The lead researchers responsible for the study utilized by the EPA are calling for closer monitoring and consumption advisories at the state level. According to the report, at this present time, eating one serving of fish is equivalent to drinking contaminated water for a month. Homosexual men and women contend that their blood is no more contaminated than the general public, and the FDA now seems to be siding with the assertion as it lifts bans prohibiting homosexuals from donating blood. Advocates for the change say that the blood of the high-risk community should be treated with science and not a stigma, referring to widespread fear stemming from high rates of HIV infection among homosexual men. Policies concerning blood donation are purportedly slated to ease for homosexual men who are in what is regarded as monogamous relationships, following the practices of countries such as Italy. The FDA is still working on new guidelines and they are expected to release new rules this coming year. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Good time, Jeff. Back to you.
The standards that they put on those blood donations are pretty unsettling because I remember in the early 80s they were having a lot of concerns. Well, they didn't have the concerns because of the blood transfusion that were coming from gay and bisexual men because of the height of the HIV epidemic, HIV/AIDS, and they come to find out people were getting HIV/AIDS through blood transfusion. So, you know, again, it seems like we're lowering our standard because we don't have enough blood, so we're trying to open the market up so we can get that, but at what risk?
Right, and I would worry about, Catan, what they don't know what else is in the blood, what they miss is there that they're giving people through these blood transfusions or donations or so forth.
That's right. So what is the leader of the Catholic Church's view on laws concerning criminalizing homosexuality? Well, the Pope said that such laws are fundamentally unjust and that being homosexual is not a crime. In an interview, the Pope also said, quote, "We are all children of God, and God loves us for what we are and the strength with which we fight for our dignity."
Being homosexual, he said, is not a crime. It is not a crime, but it is a sin. And well, we first have to distinguish a sin from crime, but a sin is also the lack of charity with one another, he said.
Which is interesting because, you know, a crime really is considered an offense, kind of offense against morality or the well-being or health of others. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's also what the Bible classifies as a sin.
Right, and Catan, I'll tell you, I'm not ashamed to admit, when the Pope talks, it's very hard to understand what he's trying to say because it's confusing.
Right, very confusing. Oh, to the northeast of Rome, Russia has approved a bill that widens a ban on LGBT propaganda and restricts the demonstration of LGBT behavior. The rules make any expression of LGBT lifestyle virtually impossible.
Any action of information that's considered an attempt to promote homosexuality, whether in public, online, in film, in books, or in advertising, could now incur a heavy fine. Previously, the law had only outlawed the promotion of LGBT lifestyle aimed at children. Lawmakers say they're defending the traditional values of the Russian world against the liberal West that they say is determined to destroy them. Gatan, I have to say, I do agree with Russia that those things are very harmful, not only to children, but to others.
So others, that's right. And that was one of Russia's big sticking points and one of the reasons that they indicated why they actually went into Ukraine, because of those great influences of the West leaching into Ukraine. And Russia was concerned that they were going to leach into Russia, which obviously they are, and they're trying to fight against those things. Well, let's take a look at this next video interview with NATO Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg in an interview with CNN regarding battle tanks being sent to Ukraine from NATO.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg live from Brussels. Secretary General, thank you for being here on what is becoming a very important day in these announcements coming from the United States and NATO allies. What is your reaction to these tank announcements? How big of a moment is this?
These are important announcements, and what Chancellor Scholz, the German Chancellor, said today really is important, because it makes it possible for Germany, but also for other European NATO allies, to provide Leopard 2 battle tanks to Ukraine, and that will significantly strengthen their combat capabilities, and it demonstrates also the unity and the resolve of NATO allies and partners in providing support to Ukraine.
Secretary General, the introduction of tanks has long been discussed. What did it take to get here?
What you have seen is that the front lines in Ukraine has stabilized, and we have seen how the Russians are digging in and are building fortifications. So if we want Ukraine to be able both to defend against upcoming Russian offensives, and we know that the Russians are planning for new offensives, and also if we want Ukraine to be able to retake territory, we need to give them more armor, more heavy and modern weapons. And therefore I welcome the U.S. leadership, the announcements that was made last week of armored personnel carriers, of infantry fighting vehicles, and now the announcements of battle tanks that altogether will strengthen significantly the combat strength of the Ukrainian armed forces, and we need that to ensure that President Putin doesn't win this war.
There has been a view that what NATO allies have provided to this point has been enough to keep Ukraine in the fight, but not enough for Ukraine to win this war. I have heard that from retired generals, military experts for quite some time. Do you think the introduction of these tanks finally provides the capability to actually win?
So NATO allies and partners have provided unprecedented level of support to Ukraine since the start of the war. And actually many allies, including the United States, trained and supported the Ukrainians before the invasion. We have done that since 2014. This has enabled them to push the Russian forces out, first of the territory in the north around Kiev, then in the east around Kharkiv, and then in the south against Kherson. Now we see that the President Putin has mobilized more than 200,000 more troops. They are ramping up production of ammunition, weapons, and they are planning new offensives. So then we need to provide even more support, not only to ensure that Ukraine survives, but actually ensure that Ukraine is able to liberate more territory, win and prevail as a sovereign independent nation in Ukraine. And that's exactly what NATO allies are doing with the announcements we saw last week, but also with the announcement of battle tanks today.
Russia's response today is that these tanks, quote, will burn just like all the others. What is your message to Russia today?
The Ukrainians have proven extremely skilled and capable in operating the equipment, the weapons NATO allies and partners have provided. And I'm absolutely certain that they will be able to do that also with main battle tanks from NATO allied countries, especially because many of them have a lot of experience already from the front lines operating Soviet era armored vehicles, battle tanks. But of course, that is a useful background when they then start training on modern NATO battle tanks. We have to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. President Putin invading another sovereign independent nation in Europe, Ukraine. Ukraine has the right for self-defense, and we have the right to support them in upholding that right. Because if President Putin wins, it's a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but it's also dangerous for us, because the message then is that when authoritarian leaders use military power, they get what they want, and then the world becomes even more dangerous and we more vulnerable. Therefore, it is in our security interest to support the Ukrainians.
Don, if you remember early on in the Ukraine-Russian war, NATO was trying to they were kind of staying back and not getting involved, even though there was some hints that they were doing things, behind the scenes. But now they're openly saying that they're going to send tanks there. So that's a pretty huge step for NATO, saying they're going to get involved in this Ukraine-Russian war.
Yeah, and Russia did give that warning out that if they do supply Ukraine with artillery or weaponry from NATO, then all the NATO countries open themselves up to attack from Russia.
Well, while Russia continues its bombardment of Ukrainian cities, the U.S. and Germany hold fast to its commitment to send military equipment to Ukraine. Now, Canada's defense minister also said that they will join in by sending 4 of its Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine.
The Ukrainian President Zelensky thanked the Canadian government and said that the Russian aggression can only be stopped with adequate weapons, be it on the ground or up in the sky.
Well, France has also delivered artillery and military vehicles to Ukraine as well, and at the beginning of January, they will supply Ukraine with AMX-10 tanks.
Well, traveling a little south to Israel, a deadly rampage outside a synagogue has left at least 7 people dead and 3 wounded on a day when many are celebrating a Holocaust Remembrance Day.
The attack was perpetrated by a Palestinian gunman who was subsequently shot dead by Israeli police. Now, Israeli officials said around 8:15 p.m. local time, a Palestinian man drove into East Jerusalem and opened fire before being gunned down.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Tom Needis, said of the attack, quote, "I'm shocked and disgusted at this heinous terrorist attack on innocent people, including children," end quote. Well, this comes after 10 Palestinians were killed the day before, including 9 who were killed in an Israeli raid into the West Bank.
Well, this is one of the most deadly attacks on Israel in years, and it comes on the heels of the election of one of the most right-wing conservative governments in the country's history. Now, officials speculate that more attacks are to come.
Well, on the last day of the week of prayer for Christian unity, Pope Francis met with members of the Pan-Ukrainian Council and religions of churches and organizations. Take a look at this next video to see the reason behind the Pope's meeting.
On the last day of the week of prayer for Christian unity, Pope Francis met with members of the Pan-Ukrainian Council of Churches and religious organizations. The Pope expressed his solidarity once again with the Ukrainian people and assured them of his prayers.
Non abbiate dubbio, io prego per voi. Io vi porto nel cuore e chiedo a Dio che abbia pietà di questo popolo così coraggioso.
During the meeting, the group expressed their hope for a future papal visit to Ukraine. Of course, we renewed our invitation to the Holy Father to visit us in Ukraine. This is a renewal of the invitation we made before. We know that the Holy Father is following the developments of the situation in Ukraine, and he's looking for a good time to come. Not only are Catholics waiting for him, but all Ukrainians are awaiting his visit. During a press conference in Rome, some religious representatives discussed the joint efforts of different faith leaders from around the world in opposing the Russian invasion and promoting a victory of truth. War is always a failure of humanity. War is always a mistake and must be condemned in and of itself. The Council of Representatives came to Rome after sending a letter to Pope Francis describing the horrific conditions of the war and asking for a word of comfort. They also participated in Vespers for the closing ceremony of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. The Metropolitan Archbishop of Lviv explained that Pope Francis's words and actions since the outbreak of the war last year have made an impact on the people of Ukraine. We know that there are not a lot of Catholics in Ukraine. The majority are Orthodox who don't really understand the role of the Pope or his position. And that's why it was maybe more difficult for them. But I mean, the people really appreciate, and the entire country of Ukraine really appreciates all that the Holy Father and the Holy See do for Ukraine. Established in 1996, the Pan-Ukrainian Council includes representatives from 15 churches and religious organizations and one interfaith organization.
Well, Katan, looks like the Pope is trying to reaffirm his commitment to Ukraine, saying that we do agree with you and we stand behind you in their fight against Russia.
Right, and I know that there's been a little bit of tit for tat back and forth between Moscow and Rome. Rome not condoning the war and Russia going in and invading Ukraine, and Moscow just kind of standing its ground and doing what it wants to do or what they want to do, because as we mentioned before, Russia does not like the influence of the West coming into its territory.
Right, and remember the meetings where the Pope did meet with President Putin, that many times President Putin was late and the Pope didn't like that, so they never really had a very great relationship. As you see with some of the other countries where they go and meet with the Pope and immediately there's changes there that take place in their country, almost as if the Pope is giving the instructions.
Right, and part of the problem what we see with we have the Pope and the Pan-Ukrainian Council. We have Russia and NATO, Israelis and the Palestinians. They don't see eye to eye on what it is that it will take to bring peace. And of course, Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh have taught for many years that there is already a standard that has been established from the Creator that can be found in the Scriptures, that if everyone will agree and uphold with these moral rules, these laws that will bring peace, they can actually have peace. There won't be any need to send more tanks to a country that could actually work things out and stop all wars. Right. Well, if you'd like to learn more about what you and your family can do to stop and prevent any wars, be it small or great, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You could also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. And for any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. Now, we do have two programs we've mentioned in the past, the Israel Says program and the Ask Israel program. The Ask Israel program is still up and running. Feel free to go there and put in your searches and download pages and pages of information on the scriptures and the answers to your questions that you have. But the Israel Says program is actually being updated, and a new and improved super version is coming. So stay tuned for that, and we will keep you posted on when the Israel Says is back up and running.
Well, up next, another classic sermon from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.